and welcome to my channel. It's Monica from Crafting with Quilling Lady, and I hope you have absolutely fabulous day. Summer is nearly over, so I thought it would be a good idea to create some autumn related cards. I really like the warm colors in autumn, so I thought, why not? So for my project I use Simply Cards Papercraft stamp set, which is called Autumn Days. It has a really nice variety of trees, different sizes of leaves, and it also has a pumpkin. And I'm going to use most of the stamps in my projects today. So for the first card I'm going to use the smallest leaves, and we're going to heat emboss the whole background. I've got a square panel. I'm going to use anti-static bag, Versamark, and we're going to stamp the leaves. If you create a background like this, it is really tricky because we can't really see the stamped images because Versamark is transparent. So what I do here, I stamp a couple of leaves and then use my gold embossing powder. It can be any gold embossing powder you have, and then I can see where I stamp the leaves. We're going to heat emboss the first set, and we're going to do it again. So again, Versamark, stamp the leaves and heat emboss. The process takes a couple of minutes, but it's definitely worth. The effect you have is absolutely beautiful, and the gold embossing powder catches the light so amazingly. I really recommend that you try this technique. I know it takes some time, but it's definitely worth. If you make a mistake here, because you can't really see the Versamark, just use a paintbrush or your finger to get rid of the embossing powder that you don't want. And do some more stamping, use embossing powder, heat your images, and then when it's cool, you can use anti-static bag. And I actually did a couple of times here, just to make sure the embossing powder doesn't stick where it shouldn't. While I make this background, let's discuss some autumn weather. So, if you know, the autumn time in UK, it's not that great. The weather is usually horrible, it rains a lot, it's really grey, and the leaves are not that beautiful. But a few years ago, in October, I went with my husband to Budapest, and I have to admit that was the most beautiful autumn I've ever seen. All the leaves were yellow, orange, red. It was absolutely stunning. And the weather, oh my gosh, it was so warm, we didn't even have to wear a coat. So if you have never been to Budapest in October, I really recommend. It was so beautiful. And I actually miss autumn time in Poland as well, because it is the same. The leaves are so beautiful and you just want to spend some time in the park. So let's go back to our background. As you can see, I'm nearly done with it. If you make a mistake here, that's absolutely fine, because we are going to cover some of the bits with our layers that we're going to create later on. If you have never ever tried creating a background using small stamps, I really recommend it, because you can create your own pattern paper, which is absolutely beautiful and unique. So now I think my background is done, so let's move on to our next step. So now I'm going to use the bigger leaves, and I'm going to heat emboss them in gold again. But I'm going to create a frame, and for this frame I actually chose 300 GSM paper because I wanted something really thick. So I created a frame. I did it off camera because I wanted to make sure that the leaves don't really touch each other. And I'm going to use Aqua markers by Spectrum Noir, and you've got all the colors listed at the top. So to color in the leaves, I use the variety of the colors, and I'm also using wet paintbrush, just to make sure that the paint or ink just mixes and blends beautifully. And I have to say that I was really pleased with the result. If you never ever used water markers, please do. And now I'm going to cut out my frame. For the inside, I'm going to use craft knife, and for the outside, scissors. And now it's time to create our sentiment. So I die cut the circle and I heat emboss happy birthday. I use the same markers that you saw earlier, and I'm using a spray bottle with water just to make sure that the colors move. And this will actually match all the leaves because the colors will be exactly the same. When you heat your small sentiments, just make sure that you don't burn your hand because the heat will get really hot. And now I'm going to add another layer of the color. So as you can see, I'm putting some of the aqua markers on my glass mat and I spray it with water. And again, I will have all the colors mixed because I use so much water. It will give me a really nice effect. So now we can move on to our next step. So here is my base card in square, and I'm going to stick my leaves that I heat embossed on gold mirror card and then stick it to the card base. Now I use double-sided foam pads for my frame, and as usual when I use double-sided foam pads I always use liquid glue on top, just to make sure that all the pieces stick really nicely. You can put the frame wherever you want. If you made a mistake, you can always cover it with it. Just put it wherever you think it's good. And now we're going to put the sentiment in the middle. And again, I put double-sided foam pads. And I'm going to use liquid glue again. To even embellish the card even more, I'm going to use gold gems, because you know me, I love gems on my cards. We are going to do it around the sentiment in the circle, and I have to say that these gold gems add so much sparkle to gold embossing and gold mirror card. This is such a good combination. So here is our first card done. If you like it, or if you ever tried creating your own background with heat embossing, please leave the comment below with the link to your project. So now we're going to move on to card number 2. I've got rectangle here, and I'm going to use 4 aqua markers by Spectrum Noir. And I was just scribbling on a card. And now I'm using wet paintbrush to move the colors around the paper. So some of them can blend, some of them can mix, and I'm going to do it again. So now I'm putting some of the aqua markers on my glass mat and use wet paintbrush to move the colors on the background. It doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to add some leaves and stamps later on, so don't worry. It will take a couple of minutes to dry your card, but that's absolutely fine because it will be really wet. With autumn, I really like the mix of yellows, oranges, and browns. This is such beautiful. And now I'm going to heat emboss the leaves. I do recommend that you use any scrap paper that you have from the card that you created, some card bases or whatever. I'm not going to use a new card, just the card I have left over from other projects. And I'm going to heat emboss with gold embossing powder. And then I'm going to use the same aqua markers by Spectrum Noir to color in all the leaves. When they are dry, I'm going to fussy cut all the leaves. It will take a couple of minutes, but it's definitely worth. And now we are going to use second generation stamping. As you can see, I'm going to stamp my first tree on my card and then on the project. That's why it won't be the main focal point of my card. The leaves will be when I stick them on later. But I think these leaves give such a beautiful texture to the card. And I didn't want it to be so bold. I just wanted some trees because, you know, it's autumn, right? So we need some trees. And now I've got my heat embossed leaves that I colored and fussy cut, and we're going to start sticking them on the card like they are falling, because it's autumn, right? And when you color in your leaves, I think it's so amazing that autumn gives us so many colors, and I try to use all those colors on this card, and I think it's absolutely stunning. If you have any projects that relates to autumn, I would really like to see your beautiful creations, so please leave a link with your project and then I can see it. It will be absolutely amazing. So from my stash I took some mirror card and I cut a very narrow strip, and I'm going to stick it nearly to the bottom, but I'm going to leave some space. And when this is ready, I'm also going to add some gems on the left and on the right hand side, just to give the card a little bit more interest. So for my sentiment, I'm going to use the same happy birthday stamp from the set, and I'm going to use the same markers. I put them on my glass mat and I'm using wet paintbrush to move the color. Now I'm going to fussy cut my sentiment, and as usual I do recommend that you turn it over because it is much easier to see the straight lines. And now I'm going to mount it on gold mirror card because it will match with the strip we have on the bottom of our card. And now I just want to see where it would fit. So I put my front panel on gold mirror card and I'm going to attach it to my card base. As usual, I've got double-sided tape and I've got some liquid glue, just to make sure everything sticks really nicely. So when this is stuck properly, we are going to attach Happy Birthday using double-sided foam pad, just to give it a little bit of dimension. And I'm also going to use gold gems, as I said before. I think it will give it even more shine and sparkle. So I chose to have 5 gems on the left and 5 on the right hand side. When you add gems, I do recommend you go with odd numbers because it is much more pleasing to the eye. As you know, I usually go with 3s, but this time I decided to do it in 5s. But now I'm also adding some gems around Happy Birthday sentiment. And now it is in 3s. So now I'm going to put a few more gems in the corner of the card. And our second card is done. So for the third card, I've got square base and I'm putting 3 colors that you can see at the top, and I'm going to use wet paintbrush and I'm adding the color to the paper. This paper is 160 GSM and it was really wet when I was working on it. But that's absolutely fine because we're going to dry it before adding a next layer. To dry it, I use my heat tool because it was much more quicker. Just wait. But don't worry, if your paper gets really wet, it's fine. Just use heat tool. And now I'm going to add another layer, and I also use a spray bottle here just to make the colors wet, and then I use ink smooshing technique, which is I put the card on the wet ink. And I'm going to dry my panel again. But this one is not done yet. I'm going to add a little bit more interest to it in a second. When you go to your next step, just make sure your card is completely dry. So now I'm going to add the brown color and I'm going to use 2 paintbrushes. One is wet with my brown color and the second one I'm just holding it just to make sure I can add some small dots of paint randomly on my panel. It will take a couple of minutes, but it gives so much to the card. I really recommend you do it. It gives such a beautiful effect. So when this is done, we are going to move on to our next step. So now I'm going to use some bigger stamps from the stamp set, and I'm going to use black waterproof ink, and I'm going to do it in the corners. As for my previous project, I heat embossed some leaves with gold, and I also colored them in with the Aqua markers from Spectrum Noir, and I'm going to put them here. So when you create your autumn projects, I recommend you create more leaves so you can use them on more projects. So now again, I stamped Happy Birthday on a circle die cut, and I'm adding the color. I put my markers on a glass mat, and I'm using wet paintbrush to move the color around the sentiment. When this is ready, we can move on and add some autumn leaves. My idea for this card was to create a frame, so I started with the corners with the stamped images, just to fill in and give it some interest, and then I also try to fill in the corners that don't have any stamps. Creating a frame, it's so much pleasing to the eye, and I absolutely love this effect. When you do this project, you can also use brown ink instead of black ink. I think it will be much easier and it will look even more beautiful, but I just didn't have any brown ink. That's why I used the black waterproof ink. When you're happy with your leaves, you can start adding the other leaves in the corners just to fill in the frame. So as you can see, for my front panel, I matted and layered it on gold mirror cards, and I also put it on the card base. And now I'm going to use double-sided foam pads, and I'm going to stick it to my sentiment and put it in the middle of the card, just to have a little bit more dimension and more interest. And it wouldn't be me if I didn't have any more things. So I also stamped the pumpkins from the set, and I colored them in and fussy cut, and I thought it was such a good idea because, you know, autumn and pumpkins, yes, they do go together. And now it's time for gold gems. I'm going to put them around my sentiment, and oh my gosh, I really love it. If you have never ever put gems around your sentiment, I do recommend you do it. It gives so much interest and sparkle. And adding gold to autumn, yes, that's how it works. And now it's our third project done. So now you can see all my 3 cards. I wonder which one is your favorite. I would really like to know. So please leave a comment down below. If you have made any of the projects with the stamp set from the magazine, I would also like to see it. So please leave a comment with a link as well. I hope you will have absolutely amazing day. Keep creating, keep sharing. I can't wait to see more. Have a good day and happy crafting!